Yes, so hello everyone. It is Friday, May 23rd, 2025. My name is Teresa Manning, and I am the Policy Director at the National Association of Scholars and the President of the Virginia affiliate of the National Association of Scholars. And I have with me today Jared Gould, who is the editor for our publication online called Minding the Campus, although it has recently expanded to include Minding the World and is accepting submissions on higher education issues from other countries. And now we have articles from Canada, the United Kingdom, I think also from France. This is the first episode of what we hope will be a bi-weekly news program that we are calling NAS News Chat. And today we hope to review three main issues that were in the news this past week. The first is the article that Jared authored that was at Minding the Campus concerning credentialism. The second issue is a hearing that was held on Capitol Hill, chaired by Congressman Burgess Owens of the House Education and Workforce Committee on Diversity Ideology, or DEI, in academia. And last, the announcement by the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, that she is founding an initiative based on a civil fraud statute that would be located in the Civil Rights Division of the Education Department, which would authorize U.S. attorneys to investigate colleges and universities who might be violating Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which is to say, turning a blind eye to racial discrimination, including continued use of the DEI offices on campuses. So a lot to discuss, especially concerning diversity ideology. But to kick it off, Jared, welcome and thank you for joining me for this. And why don't you tell us about the article that you wrote, what prompted it, and what the gist of it is?
So the article came out yesterday. I titled it "America's Obsession with Diplomas is Killing Opportunity." What inspired it was actually a conversation with a family member who is in higher education, who believes that almost everything out there needs to have some kind of credential behind it in order for it to be acceptable. Um, there's this general myth in the workforce that a bachelor's degree qualifies you for your job. Um, but really, there's so many jobs out there that shouldn't be requiring a college degree. And what's happening is employers are just putting these on there as these really strange barriers to entry. Uh, they don't really need to have these. They can filter through skills instead. But because they're not doing that, so many people are being left out and kind of kicked to the side, even though they're just as qualified for some of these jobs, despite not having a college degree.
Yeah, it's like the College and University Boone Act. Somehow it was decided that everybody needed to give money to the colleges and universities and get a degree, since the question is always cui bono, who benefits from this? And clearly the schools are the primary beneficiaries.
Well, exactly, because the schools are selling a myth that you have to go to college to have a successful life. First off, this is not only really a false sale of the university experience. You should not be going to college because it might pay off for you in the workforce. College is supposed to be there to serve as, it's supposed to be there for people who are trying to pursue truth. They're trying to uh, figure out the world in a very academic way that might not have any real world tangible benefits. And so the fact that we're requiring these degrees that really have no relation to the workforce at all is crazy. It's also crazy that the universities would sell you this idea that it does qualify you for the workforce and that it has tangible workforce skills after you graduate, even though they certainly don't.
Right. One question is why a strong academic record and solid recommendations after high school don't suffice for most of these jobs. I mean, there are a number of issues that you've raised, and one question is, um, employers just decide sort of arbitrarily that a BA is required for a job, even if a high schooler could do it just as effectively. Apparently, there's no oversight in these job descriptions, and they're just using, I think your article said, in sort of a lazy fashion, a BA to signal competence. But upon scrutiny, it looks that competence could be signaled or discerned by all sorts of things, including a strong high school record.
Yeah, well, there's two additional things there, and then there's even a third angle to all of this, which to tackle the first two, um, employees are kind of requiring it because they're almost forced to by law.
Employers,
Um,
employers.
yeah, employers are doing this because they're almost forced to by law, and this kind of comes back. I mentioned this in the piece. Back in 1972, when the Supreme Court gave its ruling on Griggs versus Duke Power, you had a situation where they said evaluating an employee or a potential employee on the basis of their skills is has desperate impact against minority groups. And so
Mhm.
therefore, employers had to look at some other way to filter for jobs. What's ironic about this, though, is that the court actually had the inverse effect in trying to protect either minorities or the lowest income people in our society by requiring a college degree for everything. They actually made it more difficult for low income people to get qualified for the workforce. I generally say this about the government. Anytime they do something, if they're trying to solve cancer, they cause cancer. If they're trying to go to the moon, they go to the sun. Uh, it's They always have the reverse effect of what they intended. Um, the second part about this, though, is the wages and the debt problem. So I know, especially as a young working professional, that wages are not commensurate with how much everything has increased. Uh,
Right.
the cost of living has gone up exponentially in the country. Housing is completely unaffordable, even for people who don't have debt. But add on to that student loan debt, it makes
Right.
it even more suffocating. And what's even crazier is you're required now for a lot of these jobs that pay, 80,000, maybe $90,000 a year when you get out of college. You're living in high cost cities. And we all know that you have to have at least $150,000 as an individual in Washington, D.C., if not more, to have really kind of a genuine free lifestyle.
A decent standard of living.
Yeah.
I would just point out that in both sectors, both the higher education sector, if you want to look at it as an economic sector, and the housing sector, there is a third party involved in a transaction. So we have lending, lenders, and whenever you have that third party, it distorts the price of whatever it is that you are seeking to purchase, because then the purchase price reflects the amount of money that the borrower can borrow. And this results in a gross distortion, even though at the start, loans look like they have this benign appearance, that they're there to help people afford housing or help people afford higher education. But in short order, actually, all this easy money inflates the price. And I think you saw Mason, who used to do the Virginia affiliate news talks with me. We had one that covered this in pretty good detail.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing that Mason pointed out in that conversation was, and I don't think that the American public actually understands this. We have young 20-somethings who are very passionate. They get into government work, and they're holding on to national security secrets, and yet they're being paid these extremely low salaries. Um, Not that it happens a lot, but that certainly makes them susceptible to bribery. Like you're not having a decent lifestyle, so a foreign government might try to offer you some kind of bribe. to make that lifestyle a little bit more comfortable for you. I mean, every young 20-something I know who is busting it on Capitol Hill, who's actually the ones putting the policies together and writing the legislative drafts, they're all living in row houses with 14 other people. They don't have decent lifestyles. Even if they had, the time to go do something with colleagues or friends, or let's say start romantic partnerships, or date, they can't do that because it's just they simply don't have the money to do it.
Yes. The only thing I would say is that talk about credentialism. A lot of these 20 somethings are on a ladder. They're starting out on the lower rung. The longer they stay in the system, the better their compensation will be. I think I mentioned when I was in the first Trump administration, I worked with civil servants who had been in the bureaucracy for decades, and they had very good salaries. So I suppose some of the 20 somethings can figure that they just have to bide their time. And of course, DC is sort of like this. It attracts type A personalities. They're always on the make, looking for their next job, their next position. And someone could say that is the life that they have chosen. But your article was more about the private sector. And the sad thing is that I think there was a time when a high school diploma, a college degree did signal something. You know, a bachelor's degree would signal that you had a certain level of reading comprehension, critical thinking, and writing skills. So the college degree reflected something real. The problem now is that none of that holds. In fact, most surveys show that during college, young people will not only lose knowledge, which is crazy, but they lose these academic skills, writing skills, critical thinking skills. And of course, that's a byproduct of what Peter Wood, the president of the National Association of Scholars, calls sterile conformity on campus. And even the high school diploma, most people, my generation, have noticed that those with a high school diploma in prior generations had a higher level of writing ability and reading comprehension than many of the masters, bachelors, and even PhDs that we have today. So the problem here, aside from the practical issue of blocking opportunity, is more fundamentally, and I don't want to get too philosophical, but there is a disconnect between the symbol or the signifier and what it's supposed to be signifying. So you have sort of a appearance versus reality disconnect, an illusion, if you will. You have all these credentials which are supposed to represent something, but they don't. And that probably has more unhealthy consequences on its own, because it's like we're all living a lie. So there's a fundamental dishonesty about it. And it sucks young people into a system that's fundamentally dishonest. And then everyone, this plays into the books that were published, BS jobs or fake jobs. So, you have to mention President Trump, who took the phrase fake news and really ran with it. And it really resonated. I mean, people understood exactly what he was talking about. But it's not just fake news, right? It's fake education. It's fake jobs. I would say a lot of fake laws, fake medicine. So we have, I used to call it the artificial age, but ultimately this is destructive for everyone. Who is it? Was it Ross Douthat who wrote Live Not by Lies? I mean, ultimately, we all need real purpose, real work. We all need reality and to live duplicity is ultimately very bad for all individuals and for society.
Yeah, well, there's so many things to unpack there. I think I'll first start off by saying that this one of the things that we're having a conversation about just out it ties to education, but it's even more broader than education. It's I've also been writing a lot about the dating life on college campuses. The previous article before this was the blue bubble elite and how,
Yeah.
women are gauging their their romantic partners by, the kind of phone that they have. Um, but there's something more serious. I mean, that was kind of a joke of an article to say like this is what's happening on college campuses and this is kind of the culture. But when we've saddled so many kids with student loan debt for jobs that didn't really require a degree, that are going to pay them really low wages, we have a family crisis. There's
Right,
no families anymore. Everybody is hyper professionalized.
right.
Everybody is worried about getting their next credential. One of the pieces that I think is worth reading for the audience in case they don't make it to the article is this section on what that other path might have looked like. And it's like what I just explained with the college debt is, yet kids are still pushed into academia with promises of higher earnings and prestige tied to a degree, an assumption that needs unpacking. Many students are now sacrificing more than 6 years to earn a bachelor's degree, time they could have spent working and investing, like starting a Roth IRA, because starting investing earlier, even with smaller contributions, typically outpaces later investments even at higher amounts. And for most people, that second path would have made far more sense. But sensible solutions have never been the forte of our policymakers, the courts, or even most employers. And so, and certainly not our colleges. And so, what we have really is a generation of people that um, are just going to be so hyper focused on their careers and paying back their student loan debt and just trying to get by, uh,
Mhm.
that we're not going to have what you should be doing in life and the things that are really purposeful and the things that actually bring people meaning, which is starting families, having children, building lives together, uh,
Yes,
building the nation.
yes.
That's not happening.
Right, 100%. Historically, I don't know, historically, higher education, which is to say post-secondary education, um, was just a luxury, an unnecessary luxury that most people weren't interested in and would never have pursued. You were required, even mandatory education laws are relatively recent, early 20th century. But this idea that people, for economic reasons, to increase their earnings, should go to college, that just on first blush raises all sorts of questions. I mean, what do you mean you're foregoing earning years? You could be earning money. You could be establishing yourself in an occupation or a profession. And as you say, the time is on your side if you start earlier. But instead, they recommend not only foregoing income, but paying tuition and then take on debt to pay that tuition. I mean, economists and financial people should have pointed out that there would have to be a super duper payoff to rationalize that particular path. And it isn't in the interest of young people. I think the best thing, what really leaders should be doing, is encouraging young people to find where they contribute, where are their talents. And the sooner you find those talents and how you can contribute and monetize those skills, really the happier you will be, because happiness is a byproduct of contributing, of carrying your load and bringing something of value to your family and to your community. So again, cui bono, the real beneficiaries were the schools that were getting all of this money, not the young people. And that's a very sobering question. Why? Why are we doing this to our young people? And then, of course, it bleeds into the immigration question because Americans, because they've been propagandized to follow this path, as you point out, family formation becomes more difficult. And this, even just in principle, the idea that having children would uh, be a bad thing or something you don't have time for. I mean, a healthy society wants its people having children. So making families more difficult is already a huge red flag that you're not in a healthy society. So
Yeah.
it's a it's sobering to think about this.
Well, there's one slight segue to make about this because, and then I'll get back to this last point that I want to make about peace because there's one more that's pretty important. But this segue is really about some other things that we've been talking about on Minding the Campus, what we talk about in our staff calls, and what NAS has been investigating for years, which is this relationship with China and our relationship with immigration. Um, some of the universities in California have been run amok with illegal immigrant students because these universities treat student visas as basically a pathway to citizenship, and the students know this. Students know that they effectively act as citizens when they get their student visas. Now, as it comes to China, I think this relationship that we started years ago, where we opened up trade to China and we basically sent all of our jobs over there, is in part the problem that we're having, and why everybody has been focused to go to college because we've been selling this myth to Americans that not just on a higher education level, but on an economic level, that we are going to be a nation of white collar workers. And in my opinion, this really comes from a culture of complete arrogance. It is basically saying that we are beneath that. We are beneath manual work. And so,
We are above that. We tell ourselves we're above
oh
that.
yeah, we tell ourselves we're above manual labor. So we're not going to be doing it. We'll ship it overseas. Um, and so where else do a lot of young people, where can they go? I mean, they really have no idea. They've been told that college is the only path. And when they look around, there's no factories anymore. We don't build anything in this country.
Right.
There's very few things that you can do in this country with your hands anymore, apart from, maybe you start your own lumber business or something, or maybe you become an electrician. But we're not building homes relatively much anymore. And we're losing those talents anyway. We've
Well,
really
I think
we've out.
we do build homes, but a lot of those businesses rely on immigrant labor.
Yeah, exactly.
So they bring in, of course, this is a question of wages. You know, they want lower wages, and the immigrants. It's funny how little things have changed. A lot of the labor protests and violence that beset England in the 19th century had to do with labor and how labor was being treated, and that gave rise, of course, to socialism and communism. But are you familiar with the term scab? A scab. No, a scab was a worker who would undermine what the unions or the organizations of workers were trying to do. So they were trying to get better compensation, more time off. But as long as another worker would come in and say, I'll do it for less, you don't have to give me vacation time, that worker would undercut the leverage, the bargaining power of the organized labor groups, which became unions. And those workers who were undermining them were called scabs.
Interesting. Yeah. So I really think that's what's happening in the country broadly is just
Right.
um, everybody here thinks, well, we're above that. We're Americans, so
Yeah.
we get to have our pick at the economy and what we're going to do, and that mostly is 9 to 5 jobs. But
Yeah.
but again, though, it's like
Yes. jobs.
Yes. None of these jobs actually require the degree, but we say that we have to go to education to qualify for them.
Yes. Do you think, the drug issue, fentanyl and Appalachia, for example, I live near the Appalachian Trail. J.D. Vance wrote the book Hillbilly Elegy, which was in part about downtrodden Ohio and drug addiction in rural America. Um, a 1-2 punch, perhaps. You deindustrialize, and those people who were good at those manufacturing jobs, then how are they going to retool? Well, they're not, but here's your fentanyl.
Exactly. Well, the other thing with that too, there's another good book. I can't remember the author, but I read this when I was in college. It was called When Work Disappears.
Mm,
There's a whole chapter dedicated, if I remember correctly, to Appalachia.
mm.
It was talking about the country more broadly and this disappearance of our manufacturing jobs, so the hollowing out of our country.
Yes,
And that has killed the spirit of so many people.
yes,
We like to think that these jobs just started disappearing, 100 years ago, but they didn't. My my grandfather was able to retire from GM,
right.
but that GM factory that he retired from closed within 5 years of his retirement, and now everything is made overseas.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah,
this is a relatively new hollowing out, and what's so fascinating about it, it's really just it is self-sabotage.
yes.
We've given all of our technology, all of our knowledge to other nations, and this is an interesting to bring it back to education. This is what's really fascinating. Most American students that are going to college are not going into STEM. They're going into the humanities, the liberal arts, which have all been co-opted by the left. So they're graduating with these, not only are they not being educated, they're being totally radicalized politically
Right,
to hate
right,
to hate their country.
right.
Um, but the people that are going into STEM are foreign nationals. Se-
Yeah.
70% of the people that are in STEM programs at Texas A&M, for example, are Indian nationals. Um, and what's amazing about this is that we like to say that, oh well, they're going to stay in America and help us, and they're going to be the best and brightest for our country, and they'll contribute. And many of them do actually stay here and work in jobs, but they do it through the H-1B visa, and they save half of their money and send it back to their family in their other country
Mm.
or in their home country. So effectively, our country is a piggy bank for the whole world. Um,
Well,
and
also, it's crazy in a country of 320 million people that you would ever need to import foreign labor. It was one thing in the 19th century when America was trying to settle this expanse, between ocean and ocean and needed to build railroads and buildings and settle cities. But we don't have any need whatsoever to turn to any foreign individual. I mean, you should never, be taking people into your home if your family is dysfunctional, not taken care of. You're not in a position, it has to be taken care of your children first, and then you can welcome people into your home. So, this is just a deceitful advance toward globalism that most Americans, actually most Westerners, most of the Western nations never consented to. So just that initial point, a country of our size, with our advantages, with natural resources, has no need, none, to turn to any foreign student or any foreign labor. So people need to think on that. We're in a different stage now than what we were in the 19th century.
exactly. Well, I guess just to conclude that part of the talk, people who are watching this video can go look at some of the research I've done on not just the illegal immigration happening in our universities, but also the H-1B visa and how foreign nationals are using our higher education systems as effectively a way to just immigrate here. Uh,
Yeah.
and
So do you think the universities hate American people?
there exists.
Because they are preferring non-Americans. And do you consider yourself an economic nationalist of sorts along the lines of Steve Bannon?
I think for as much as academic administrators complain about capitalism, they are the biggest capitalists in the country. They are totally willing to sell out their own people as long as it means that they can rake in more money from foreign nationals and fill their seats with students from abroad.
Yeah,
And by the way, that's the big thing that people need to know. Americans have generally been sold this myth that everything that we do is for this benevolent cause, and that we're helping the poor and the sick and all of this nonsense. It's the very wealthy from other countries that are paying their way over here. We're,
right,
we're not taking somebody from the lowest caste system in India and educating them. We're,
right,
we're educating multimillionaires from India who are paying their way to get to our universities.
right.
And the reason why is because they don't want to live even in their own country. They want to live in America. And they see the higher education system as an effective way to migrate here because when they get that student visa, they're treated like a citizen.
Yes. So it's not really helping those other countries. And in our country, the question is demographically, if you displace the American people who primarily came from Western Europe and the United Kingdom, if you displace that people, if you will turn America into these other third world nations, this is the thesis, of course, of Ann Coulter.
Yeah. Well, there is I do want to be a little bit more not a not a yeah, I want to be a little bit more balanced because yes, there are some academic administrators in this country who I think are totally willing to sell their own country out. But at the same time, they're also having a very huge difficulty actually getting competent American students. And that's just because our K-12 schools are so bad. I mean, when you have a school district in Baltimore, Maryland, that's graduating 18-year-olds that have effectively a third grade reading comprehension, um, yeah, these aren't students that are primed for academia. They're
Yeah,
not going to go to.
fair enough. I guess I think it's always a minority that is super competent or academically inclined. So um, I don't buy that employers cannot find Americans. And incidentally, I was a visa student in Canada at the University of Toronto. And before I entered the country, I was always stopped at the border to show my student visa. I was told I could not take a job from a Canadian. In fact, I had to show my bank account that I could survive for the academic term with what I had in my bank account. So, admittedly, if you look at the entire population, can you find people? There are always more people who aren't qualified for high level jobs, but those Americans are there. I do not buy for a single second that employers cannot find an American to fill the job. And Canada didn't believe that either. When I was going into Canada, they knew that they could find a Canadian and that I should not take a job from a Canadian.
Right. And allegedly, to the left, Canada is more malevolent than we are, but obviously
Yes.
that.
Yes. Well, that I don't know if that remains the case, but on this point, the idea of allegiance to your country, in Western nations, this type of patriotism, what's called nationalism, has been demonized. Um, uh, Sort of out of the Second World War, we've seen the excesses of nationalism. So we've been disabused of any sense that you should love your country, or you should love it, but only to a point. You should also, welcome everyone from the globe. And I think that needs to be unpacked also. That I always say, I like my kids better than I like other people's kids, not because they're better, but because they're mine and they like me better than other mothers. It's at least last time I checked. What is going on here? It is the most natural, healthy thing in the world. I mean, all of civilization depends on people loving their mom for no good reason other than she's our mom. And moms love their children for no really good reason other than they are my children. And it's that type of allegiance and affection that is baked in, that is natural and good, that allows for a society to flourish. And of course, patriotism is of the same type of thing, that you love your country, not because you think, oh, it's the best country in the world by objective standards, but it's yours. You were given that country. Nationalism comes from the Latin native, which means born, nativity, naturalization. And you are given the benefits of your country and the burdens. This is a conversation we could have regarding citizenship and naturalization. And I'm not taking the position that no one can become a citizen of another country. However, we ought to ponder what it means to have a country, to have a nation, and to love your nation similar to how you love your family. And we shouldn't run from that and think that it's irrational to love your country or that this is somehow a bad thing. That would lead you to not loving your own children. And of course, we see a lot of that as well. People feel free to divorce and leave their families. And I think all of this is of a piece. What do you think?
I think it's all one big giant piece, and I honestly think that so much of it does go back to education because you look at what they're teaching in the classroom. Well, we have to divide everybody on the basis of gender and race. And then, by the way, there is no such thing as gender. Um, and then, by the way, there is no such thing as race. That's all relative as well.
They're social constructs.
Every, everything is real, but everything is also a social construct at the same time. Try to get your head around that one.
Yes.
But in actuality, though, what they're teaching in some of these history rooms, the anthropology, there's anthropologists that are now teaching that if you dig up the bones, you can't tell the difference between the sexes. Elizabeth Weiss has written on this for Mining the Campus. And we've got a dozen other authors who've pointed this out, even in the sciences. So what's happening is crazy. It's indoctrinating people. And that indoctrination goes with them through the rest of their life. They don't get married, or if they do get married, it's, divorce is okay. Well, because, everything is relative. There is no truth.
Mhm. Yes. It's interesting the arrogance you pointed to, an arrogant society, because the original understanding of the life of the mind was that you would seek to understand the world and understand other people, human nature. And if you think about it, the idea of understanding something puts you in a sort of a subordinate position. You have something out there that you seek to understand. And then you can proceed accordingly if you understand it. I always use the example of fire. You better understand how fire works, because fire can be very dangerous. It can also toast your marshmallows and heat your house, but you have to make sure you have bricks and stones and not dry wood to ignite the house. So that idea is that puts you in your place, if you will. You have to understand something outside of you. But if everything is just a social construct, well, there's no constraint then on you. It's just a question of who has the stronger social construct or who convinces most people. It's like the word narrative. So the term narrative suggests that there might not be a reality or a truth. It's just your narrative. And if it's just a narrative, if these are all just social constructs, what happens is the most powerful people who get to impose the narrative on you or the social construct on you um, uh, become tyrannical. And reality is supposed to be a check on that type of tyranny and on our own behavior. So this sort of comes full circle that there's something fake going on. The credentialism is fake. The credentials don't correspond with anything real. We call everything a social construct. So we're not supposed to think that anything is real. And that means that the powerful people who get to impose their narrative or their social construct get to be tyrants. So that is a fairly good lead into the hearing that I wanted to at least bring up this past week on Capitol Hill, which concerned diversity ideology, which I have written on and you have written on, that we see this as self-evidently destructive, just uh, forcing people to think in terms of a racial background, which means that character and competence get demoted, and your race and your ethnic background go out front. The very word, I think, is poisonous because it highlights our differences. And the idea that diversity is our strength is Orwellian, of course. Strength is found in unity, as is integrity. That is what integrity means, that something is unified. The word holy means that something is unified and integrated. So diversity is a wolf in sheep's clothing. It is to bring the Tower of Babel chaos to a society. And that really is what we have. So I remember in the 90s when I first heard this diversity, I thought it was a joke. Who was going to fall for this? And here we are decades later, and people are still talking about it and have added words like belonging and equity. As I've said in articles, diversity does not appear anywhere in the founding documents of our nation. The only reason this word has traction is that the powers that be, those who are able to impose a vocabulary on us, have imposed it, and then certain self-interested parties have run with it. But any talk of diversity, as I say, displaces moral character, which should be of paramount importance, and it displaces competence. So at the hearing this past week, there were 4 presenters in total, one who took a vehement stance in favor of diversity, a university administrator, surprise, surprise. But the others were fairly good. There was someone from Do No Harm, which is a recent organization to argue for real medical care without regard to the race of the doctor or the patient, which we would take as self-evidently legitimate. So it was interesting as far as hearings go, but a little disappointing to see that people are still taking seriously what is so obviously a destructive movement.
Yeah. Well, I want to elaborate on this DEI stuff in two different ways. Uh, Number one, first comes with this comment that was made on one of our articles on mining the campus. Dr. Ed, he writes by Dr. Ed, said healthy on the outside, DEI on the inside. We now
Healthy on the outside,
health,
healthy.
healthy on the outside, DEI on the inside. And what he's really pointing to are these campuses that say they are a health promoting campus. It's now HPC, and there are literally a list of over 100 universities that call themselves these HPC partners. But really, when you go and look at what this says, it's really just DEI in a different language.
Right.
And I thought it was funny for one commenter to say, so you don't have any idea what DEI actually is. You just use a lot of words to say, I wish we could go back to a time when being an asshole to people who were different than you was accepted. This is what the left thinks. So I wrote back saying, I'd say it's actually the riders of Minding the Campus who truly get what DEI is. The left, whether on purpose or not, paints it as this noble fix for perceived wrongs, but it's really a divisive, soul-crushing policy that spits on merit. It judges students and faculty by race, not their character, and definitely not their ideas, unless those ideas bow to whatever the left says is acceptable at the time.
Yeah, it's clearly a divide and conquer strategy, and it's just a new name on an old practice. It used to be called racial preferences or reverse discrimination or affirmative action. It's just all those things rolled into another name. And the hearing actually brought out this rebranding phenomenon. So it's like these termites that won't go away. But none of this adds up. And actually, some of the members of Congress pointed out that so many people want to come to America from all different nations. Well, why do they want to come if we are so completely beset by racial bigotry? And the truth is that, comparatively speaking, the United States, and I would argue the West in general, is more accepting of all sorts of differences because, in part, of our Christian heritage, which is more individualistic. Unlike tribal religions, where your tribe, your group is of paramount importance, in a Christian society, which is our heritage. I'm not saying everyone is an observant or practicing Christian. You save your own soul. You hope that you're saving the souls of those around you. And we have a greater sense that your tribe doesn't matter as much. If you look in Africa, in the Middle East, in the Far East, you see these tribal loyalties where ethnic tension is much, much worse. However, certainly the powers that be in the West and in the United States are trying to make us far more tribal and cognizant of our ethnic background and hostile toward those of European descent. So it's destructive in principle, it's destructive in practice. And as much as I commend the Congress for holding a hearing to highlight how destructive it is, I am still a little disappointed that people take this seriously. And obviously, with Trump, we have a very good moment that he has signed a number of executive orders to abolish diversity, equity, inclusion. Again, this is just neo-racism that most Americans reject. So all to the good, but still very surprised it had the traction it did.
Yeah, well, there's something even beyond this that listeners to this program need to be aware of, and that is that we can no longer just think that DEI is a thing of four-year institutions. This is now in our professional programs. It's in our professional schools.
Like medicine. That was, yeah.
Yeah, so I wanted to mention briefly that in the report that I wrote for Speech First, which was a report that was broadly based on FOIA records and public records that we obtained through FOIA requests of more than 50 schools across the United States, showed that DEI has really been now this huge thing. I've always been one to believe in the whole slippery slope theory, and I'm proving to be correct that it happens because, it started out with just race, it started out with gender, but now it is weight inclusivity, and so much so that you can now be called a bigot if you tell your obese patient at University of Texas at Austin's Dell Medical School that you have to be weighed. Is that not insane? I mean, this is and not to mention the transgender ideology that's now affected the medical schools. Every student passing through has to take it, and it's all part of DEI initiatives. So it's not just race, it's not just, sex anymore. It's now, well, we are going to promote the transgender movement through DEI, and we're also going to promote this weight inclusivity thing through DEI.
Yeah.
Obese people are oppressed, of course.
Yeah, I think it is ultimately agents of chaos and a war on reality. This was clear, a war on reality and morality. With the Black Lives Matter in 2020, it wasn't just about race. It was also against heterosexuals. It was against the traditional family. These were planks in the platform of the Black Lives Matter movement. So they take race because ethnic tension is a real thing. It exists across the world. Just throw a dart at a globe and you will find racial and ethnic tension because people are ultimately tribal. And even Christianity, when I talk about that, the Great Commission, go out and make disciples of all nations. Christianity recognized that there were tribes and nations, but offered a way to transcend that. But this is, they use racial tension because it's a real thing to attack a moral order and a social order. And so that's why Black Lives Matter at first blush, it seems to concern race, but actually they're going after human sexuality, morality and human sexuality, the family. So again, there's deceit with all of this. It's just another move by the political left to wage this war on reality. And I too, the gender ideology, which didn't exist 20 years ago, obviously, this isn't a real sickness and it isn't widespread. It afflicts a tiny, tiny fraction. And that fraction itself reflects top-down suggestion. So there's, again, more artificiality with respect to all of this diversity, especially in the realm of human sexuality. Now, the hearing on the Hill didn't get into gender ideology, but it did talk about this rebranding and also medical practice. And they're racializing everything. Your doctor should be of the same race. I think they call that racial convergence. So you're right that this becomes absurd. To talk, you can't bring up that someone is overweight and that's a health risk. Once you get away from reality, you do enter, I think, the absurd. I mean, I think diversity is our strength is on its face absurd. It's just an absurd statement. Yeah, so I don't know if Minding the Campus covered the hearing at all.
We did not yet, but I have assigned this topic out. So we're hoping what Minding the Campus is really trying to get at is if any of these things are going to actually be codified into law. One of the things I've been writing about is I love what the Trump administration is doing. It's, hoorah. But what happens in 4 years when the American public is psyoped into voting for a Democrat? So,
Well, yeah.
if that happens, none of this stuff would have been worth it, because we need to get this stuff codified into law. The president has to work with Congress to actually make them move on this, and we don't really have that much more time left because the midterms are going to be coming around, and of course, people are going to be psyoped into voting for Democrats. They're going to be
Yes.
Elon
Well,
Musk is taking your rights, and even though that's not happening, they're still going to believe it.
yes. Well, I agree to a point. I think there is tremendous value in dismantling this house of cards that the political left has built. There's a lot of value in just calling out how destructive the diversity ideology is. But so I think there is value, but I agree that it should have more permanence. But that brings us to the Supreme Court, addressed all this diversity stuff in its 2023 decision, Students for Fair Admission against Harvard. And it really did dismiss a lot of the diversity claims and banned racial preferences in admissions, starting with this idea that because you have a particular ethnic background, you're going to think in a certain way or hold certain opinions. And so you can contribute diversity to a college campus. I mean, this is insulting on its face that your ethnic heritage would determine how you think. So the court addressed this, and that's what has given rise to the announcement by the Attorney General that they are going to start to investigate colleges and universities who continue to peddle this racial ideology with a civil fraud statute, because colleges and universities to receive federal funds agree to abide by federal law as interpreted by the courts and the Supreme Court especially. So the diversity ideology flouts the Students for Fair Admission opinion, and Pam Bondi now is ready to go after these colleges and universities, including if they just rebrand. And the damages for a finding that they continue to engage in racial discrimination can be very high. The statute authorizes treble damages, so 3 times the amount. So this is a good development. As I always say, we can pass a lot of laws. You know, Jared, you say you want things on the books. Fair enough. But laws are not self-enforcing. You need, unfortunately, for example, for the First Amendment, you need someone to sue. That doesn't just, people don't just comply. And, you know, lots of people drive 45 and a 35 mile per hour and they get away with it for years and years. And it takes a police officer to sit at the corner to start enforcing that speed limit. So we have this enforcement problem, and that's why the Justice Department, taking note of the schools basically ignoring Students for Fair Admission, is so important. So our members should be aware of that. They should take a look at the announcement that was issued on Monday. And I don't even know that a complaint, certainly complaints can trigger an investigation, but it may not even require a complaint. I need to check on that.
Yeah. Well, I think that listeners and anybody that's a member of NAS and any just reformers out there should be hopeful that things are looking good. Things are getting rolling out there. We're pushing forward initiatives that have the opportunity or have the chance to actually make longstanding changes. They should also be aware, on the other hand, that even if the president did everything right, he got the executive orders out, we passed this into law, and he enforced it. You still have the problem of universities just flouting the law. They don't care. They will still stick to their guns. And so people have to pay attention to that, file complaints, and you have to hit the universities where it matters. And that seemingly, as with the case of Harvard, seems to be its pocketbook.
Yes, yes, yes. The federal funds, I mean, we are seeing that play out, and schools are watching. So that is, of course, another topic that we can get to in more detail in another program, what is happening with Harvard. I'd be happy to discuss that. I think we throw around certain terms like academic freedom without thinking through exactly what's at stake and what constitutes academic freedom. So maybe we can do that at the next program, but I don't want to go over time. So I'm just so thankful for you, Jared, that you agreed to talk today. I hope we can do this again in 2 weeks. And keep up the great work at Minding the Campus. And as I understand it, you take submissions. So those academics who might be retired and want to contribute, they could do that.
Yeah. All they have to do is send me an email, which is easily accessible on the website.
On the website. Okay, great. Hey, so have a great holiday weekend. It's Memorial Day, and we will see you hopefully in 2 weeks.